Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural panel discussion on the theme of adaptability and digital transformation. I am Alpha Obika, and I will be your moderator for today's event. This is the first in a three-part series of reflections from faculty members and recent graduates of the Caribbean School of Media and Communication, CARIMAC, as well as industry players. The other two events will be staged on June 18 and June 25th, 2020. These CARIMAC events are part of the Humanities in Action virtual seminar series staged by the Faculty of Humanities and Education here at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. Under the theme of adaptability and digital transformation, the panelists will focus on the topic preparing for media careers in the future. This is particularly important not only for students who are preparing to enter the job market, but also current employees and employers who will need to be agile in adapting to the rapidly evolving technological changes and their impact on the job market in Jamaica and across the region. Today, we will hear from faculty members whose expertise cover the specializations of animation, film production, broadcast journalism, digital media production, and integrated marketing communication. And now to introduce the panelists. Steffon Campbell is an assistant lecturer at CARIMAC, published author, communication consultant, and freelance journalist. He holds a BA in Media and Communication, a MA in Communication Studies, and is currently pursuing a PhD in Social Policy at the University of the West Indies. His areas of specialization include organizational communication, communication on taboo issues, social policy, and the role of media in public information and education. Our next panelist is Rayanne Smith. She's an assistant lecturer and program coordinator in the Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film Production at CARIMAC. She's a writer, filmmaker, and an award-winning photographer. She received a Fulbright scholarship and completed her MFA in film production at Chapman University, producing a thesis film that was selected for numerous film festivals worldwide. Ms. Smith holds a BA in mass communication and is presently an MPhil PhD candidate at CARIMAC. Chevonice Shevers-White. She's an assistant lecturer and program coordinator of the Bachelor of Fine Arts in Animation at CARIMAC. Having attended the VTDI, I Create Institute, and the UE, she has gone on to work on an award-winning animated series. Mrs. Shevers-White has served the Jamaica Animation Nation Network as brand manager and marketing executive, and the Caribbean Examination Council as assistant chief examiner for animation and game design. David Soutar. He is a lecturer and program coordinator of the Digital Media Production Program at CARIMAC. He is a co-founder and principal of /Roots Foundation and holds a BFA in graphic design from Savannah College of Art and Design and an MA in computer science from the University of the West Indies. Mr. Soutar has lectured in design and visual communication at the Edna Manley College of Visual and Performing Arts, the University of Technology Jamaica, and San Francisco State University. He also sits on various boards and committees. Olivia Bravo. She's a PhD candidate in the School of Communication at Florida State University. Her work has been published in the Journal of Marketing Communications, and she has presented at various conferences. Her research interests include strategic communication, consumer behavior, brand and consumer activism. She has close to 2 decades of experience in marketing and has worked in various capacities in the hospitality and higher education sectors. So now that we've introduced our panelists, let me encourage all of our viewers to utilize the chat feature of the YouTube channel to type your name, your questions, and your comments. Please let us know where you're from, as I know that we may have viewers from other countries in the Caribbean and beyond. We have the chat room monitors who will ensure your questions are given to the panel during the question and answer period. So please hold your questions and be sure to share them with us in the chat room feature. Your feedback and engagement is very important to us. So after introducing the panel, it's very important for us now to start to think about this topic of adaptability and digital transformation. We're living in a time where social distancing has become the norm, where we've been required to work from home, and many of us, some digital natives, some who have not been very familiar with utilizing the technology, have had to make critical adjustments in order to survive. This has implications not only for our own survival and interaction in an increasingly digital world, but also for those who work in the media and communication industry. What are some of those changes, those dilemmas, and those issues that have now come to the fore that we need to address and discuss? That's the basis of this panel discussion today. So my first question to start the ball rolling would be to Mr. Soutar. This notion of adaptability and digital transformation, especially in a time like this, what is it and how are the two interconnected?
Thanks very much, Dr. Obika. In defining digital, I always fall back to the definition proposed by Tom Loosemore, who was one of the founding members of the UK's Digital Government Service. He defines digital as applying the culture, processes, business models, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. And for me, the part that stands out is that are those raised expectations. We now live in an age where it's common for you to buy your groceries online and have them delivered to your house, as many of us have been forced to do over the last few months. And that kind of instantaneous feedback loop is now becoming the standard and the expectation of many consumers when interacting with their services. And so it behooves various institutions, whether they're educational, whether they're a commercial entity, to start to change the thinking around how you operate and how you offer your service to the general public, because they're expecting a more modern modality of business. And so for many, adapting to these changing expectations has been challenging. I mean, as many of you on this call can relate to, changing your teaching methods and modalities over the last few months to respond to the needs of our students has been a bit of a paradigm shift for many of us. And so adaptability really is encapsulated there in that ability to be agile and to change to meet these needs and expectations.
Okay, so David, just to follow up a bit before moving to the next panelist, this notion of digital transformation, how do you see that and how do you think we're doing as a country?
I think we're not doing too bad in some regards. When you look at the fact that you can order your yam and pumpkin from from farmers or from your local market providers, that they're now, the idea of a middleman has been redefined. I mean, the middleman used to be someone who drives a large truck from St. Thomas or St. Catherine or Manchester bringing the produce into Coronation Market. Now your middleman is someone with a website or a WhatsApp account who is taking your order and driving up to your gate to give you your produce. And this sprung up in some regards overnight. Granted, this change has been happening for a few years now, just in pockets. These digital tools have been the preferred mode of choice for disruptors, for those individuals who don't have the financial ability to go toe-to-toe with traditional businesses on their own playing field, but instead have carved out a digital playing field to be able to compete with these giants of industry. So no, I think the change has started to become more visible of late and accelerated.
Thank you very much, David. I want to ask the same question to Olivia Bravo. I know that Olivia, you're completing your PhD out there in the US, and you would have been experiencing the trauma of the crisis that has taken place, and many persons have died as a result of the recent COVID virus, etc. In terms of adaptability and digital transformation from where you sit, how do you see the two connected, especially taking into consideration knowing our local realities in the Caribbean, but also working and studying in the US?
Let me start by saying David's point, his last point about the incremental changes that occur, right, or have been occurring in Jamaica, really led to providers, service providers, whether they are farmers or grocery store owners or so on, using that as a platform or jump off point to meet people's expectations. That certainly is an aspect of adaptability that I've seen come out of the literature. Adaptability for me means that there is a capacity for people to respond successfully to changes, to uncertainty, and to constraints. Yes, I think the United States has seen that happening. A lot of the innovations were already in place, which would allow people to respond on personal, individual levels to the pandemic. The universities here as well have dual modality in terms of how they treat with teaching. So online courses were already in place. And so the switch, for instance, from face-to-face teaching to online, for the most part, was not so difficult, except where there was a knowledge gap, right? Now, this is also a part of adaptability from my point of view, right? Adaptability and being able to adapt requires knowledge. And without it, you can't respond adequately, successfully, creatively to the changes that are occurring. And so knowing what technologies exist, knowing how to transfer skills that you already have in place so that they can meet the expectations and so that you can be responsive to the issues that are arising really becomes important. Nice. So for me, adaptability encompasses several things: knowledge, skills, resources, foresight, which David alluded to in his talk a while ago, and also planning. And I mean, I know it seems a little strange or inconsistent when we're talking about adaptability and responding to uncertainty, because how can you plan when there is no clear indication of what is coming at you? But I think by understanding your environment, by paying attention to the changes, the ebbs, the flows, the trends, you can put things in place that will allow you to respond well. So for instance, the University of the West Indies again, uses various learning management systems. And although there may have been a delay in action, the resource existed, the knowledge existed, and with some time, we were able to respond.
Nice. Thank you very much, Olivia. There's a lot more that I want to ask, because based on the definition that you have outlined, it makes me wonder whether because different environments may have a difference in their capacity with resources, their finances and expertise, etc., whether the level of adaptability would be different. But I'm hoping that the audience would ask some of these questions, because we have some other questions that need to be asked to our panelists. So thank you very much, Olivia. One of the biggest changes that need to be made in this current time is in the process of learning and teaching that has caused a major crisis in many different parts of the Caribbean. We see even for CXC and other regional examinations, major dialogue. I also want to say disagreements, but major dialogue taking place to find solutions, and as we try to adjust and adapt to this new way of living. So my next question I want to direct to Chevany Chevers-White, who I know has some experience and knowledge with CXC. The question is, explain the new digital learning landscape, and what does it mean for teaching and learning? You can unmute, Chevany.
What we're finding is that different countries are trying to incorporate different techniques in order to deal with what school will look like when it's reopening. So we have solutions such as having classes outside. We have solutions such as reducing the number of students. Even our own government of Jamaica is suggesting that we have students, no more than 10 to 12 students within any one classroom. And we're also recommending a shift system. We're moving back to a shift system where we can accommodate half of the school in the morning and then another shift in the afternoon. And so that's what we're seeing. And that also will be taken into effect at the tertiary level. These are recommendations for primary, secondary, and tertiary levels.
Okay, so Chevany, in terms of your range of teaching experiences, not only at the tertiary level, but going right down to being involved in the high school education, in terms of the transformations that are needed, how, especially our secondary schools, our high schools, how are they doing? What needs to be done to improve? Because I know many of them were not equipped prior to this current period to work remotely, to work from home, as well as teachers not being equipped. To your knowledge, how have we been able to transition and operate within this environment?
We're not responding very well. Most of the schools that are in the corporate area, they're able to respond, and even then, we still have schools that are not able to deliver all of what they need to do via online. So we have distant learning and remote learning, and what we're finding is that we had about 30,000 students that weren't served since March 13. 30,000 Jamaican students. And so that was because of a lack of internet, a lack of power supply. That was because of a lack of equipment, whether that was a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer. They just didn't have the mechanisms in place. So in regards to transforming what we need to do, obviously we have to look at our internet supply and our power supply. But in addition, most schools weren't looking at remote learning. They weren't trying to incorporate printed versions and delivering them directly to students. So what we were finding, we found about 2 or 3 schools that incorporated that, where the principal actually went into the school, printed worksheets, printed the information that they needed, and personally delivered them to the school, to the students. There were also schools that were trying to supply students with tablets and smartphones as well, which is important. But really, we need to look at the devices that we have, and we must look at our internet and our power.
Thank you very much, Chevenise. You've raised a number of questions that could be the subject of many different panel discussions, from the electricity supply, from the issue of access to the technology, much less to even be able to utilize them. I want to ask this question to a gentleman from Tobago who has worked in the Western Jamaica campus for 10 years, despite still being quite young. Steffon Campbell, this whole process of the digital learning landscape, based on your experience, I know that you teach a number of persons who work in the hospitality industry, which is very important for the economic survival of Jamaica. How do you see digital transformation and adaptability functioning in this new digital learning landscape?
Thank you, Dr. Obika. I think this crisis has brought us into the future, dragged us into the future, kicking and screaming. A lot of students were already able or already willing or existing in a digital space. It just took some time for the way we teach people to catch up to that, right? I think the technology, however, is catching up to our definition of the individual and how that individual learns. For we've been existing and teaching in somewhat of an analog, unidimensional way. This has allowed us, and in the example of my students, some of them who said, finally you all realize that we don't have to sit in one space and all learn at one time in the same way. You know, everyone learns differently, and the technology and the digital landscape is forcing us to understand more about the human being. But Dr. Obika, I'm going to take it a step further, and building on what Olivia said earlier, as it relates to adaptability. We usually teach in silos. So we would teach history in history, language in language, and so on and so forth. That's not how the human being is as an individual. We exist at a space of, at a point of intersection. So our teaching needs to also be interdisciplinary, right? And the technologies, as Marshall McLuhan said, and the late Professor Agri Brown, these technologies are extensions of ourselves. And as the technology advances, we are able to extend different elements of not only the sensory nature, but to show off or to showcase the different aspects of our mental nature. And in comes the argument of STEM versus STEAM, you know, science, technology, engineering, and math, or whether it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math for a faculty like humanities and education. We need to break down these boundaries that we place the individual, the learner in, and understand that they are the representation, they are the epitome of that intersection. And the best way to teach them is by intersecting with the technologies as well.
Very good point, Steffon. And I would like Olivia to respond, because I know that you said something that Olivia would have mentioned earlier. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, I just found Steffon's point about the intersection of technologies interesting. And also considering Chevenise's point earlier about kind of resource issues, right? That were quite obvious with the shift to online teaching or teaching remotely in Jamaica, and perhaps in some other Caribbean countries. I think one of the things we need to consider as we discuss adaptability and digital transformation from a student's point of view is technological apprehension. So even as we talk about engaging them online, It's also to recognize where their gaps, where their need gaps are, where are their gaps, right? So as we are pushing people towards using the technology more, we need to assess whether they're actually ready for this and how can we prepare them as educators to use the technology. So how do we assess and how can we diagnose and make them ready to use the space?
Thank you. Let me allow Chevronese White to also make a quick response here. Go ahead.
We also should take a look at our teaching strategies. Teaching face-to-face, it's certainly different from teaching online, as most of us would have found out by now. Keeping those students engaged, it is very difficult when it is an online space, especially since the technology is not accommodating. Most of the time we've been instructing our students, okay, it's fine, turn off the video because the video will take up more bandwidth. And so you end up with muted microphones, cameras that are turned off. And so now you're not sure if you're engaging the student as you'd like to engage the student. And so coming up with these different teaching strategies, which they exist, we just need to learn about them and apply them in the classroom. And it's the same thing for the student as well. It is not enough to just sit down or lie down or just be casual about your education. You now have to put in a little bit more into what you have to do, what you have to get, what you have to learn, because no longer is there a teacher directly in front of you to say, do this, do this. You have to have that personal drive now in order to get what you need to get done.
Thank you, Chevronese. And I know as someone who teaches animation across a broad spectrum of the education landscape, that you're very well aware of the challenges involved in teaching. And I want to put Rhiannon on the spot and also ask her, because as someone who teaches film production, this process of adaptability in a space where, okay, to make a film, obviously, you need to have many different people operating in a similar space. How has digital transformation affected that pedagogy for film?
Thank you for that, Dr. Obika, for putting me on the spot there. I've been listening to what my colleagues have been saying, and it's very interesting because in film production, and I'm going to focus on storytelling in film, that, you know, in creating these stories, we're taking the human condition and we're making it visual for everyone to see. And having to do that in a sort of socially distant space setting has been very difficult. But for creatives, it is now to think of, you know, what do I have in my possession that I can use to tell the stories that I tell? And I want to expand that broader than just film production, because essentially all of the programs that we do here at CARIMAC, integrated marketing, communication, digital media production, film production, animation, journalism, we're all telling stories. What we do is we train storytellers. They may be nonfiction, they may be messages for corporate or social marketing, but they're all essentially stories. And so I remember hearing once, I think it was Toyota had a slogan, you know, we're not selling products, people want solutions. And that is what, you know, we train our students to do, that we find solutions. So it is up to them. Our job as educators is to prepare them for the world that is going to exist, right? So they have to be able to adapt. We don't know what that world is going to be, but they need to be in a space. If you want them to work in a crisis, we have to train them to be prepared for when that crisis comes, right? So they have to adapt. They have to think on their feet. They have to be creative. They have to use what they know and then apply that to what they don't know and be flexible.
All right, thank you very much, Rayanne. And I will ask you to expound a little further as we proceed. But Steffon raised a point that has resonated with us. We need to change the way we teach, and we need to adapt and adjust this whole notion of operating in silos, where we have students who have a diversity of interests and want to be able to tailor their own training and their own education. I know David Soutar is big on this, but we'll discuss that a little later on. We need to change the way we teach, but this is also connected to a reality where we want to choose and dictate the content as users and as audiences that we access. So my next question to Olivia Bravo is describe what it means for us as audiences. What does digital transformation and adaptability mean for us as audiences in this current time?
I think it means it means something extremely good for audiences, and there are also some drawbacks. This digital transformation, we're seeing it already playing out online on the internet. What I mean in terms of the good part of digital transformation is, for instance, audiences now can act as producers of content too. So although we're training storytellers and producers of content, communicators, audiences who may not be trained are also creating content too. They have access to some of the similar tools and resources that our students may have. And so what does that mean for the practice and for the industry? Well, one way is, for instance, in advertising and marketing, is that the content that's created, user-generated content that's created and we see posted on social media, or the reviews that we see posted on Google or Amazon, those things can get harvested by media professionals, communication professionals, to further the storytelling by including and involving the audience, the users in the story. We can actually connect with them better. So in that case, it benefits both parties, right? On the negative side or flip side, I would say digital transformation can carry some ills with it, and we live in an age of disinformation. We live in an age where my head can be transposed onto someone else's body, and my lips can be made to move, and I can be seen as saying something that I did not say. So there is also this thing that's happening that our students need to recognize. But from the audience's standpoint, from the user standpoint, it means becoming more digitally literate. How can we spot these things, and how can media and communication professionals, how can academia, how can industry, and possibly policymakers come together to help our citizens become more informed about what's happening online? It's great that they have access to all these great, fantastic things, and we can shop online and we can use WhatsApp and whatever else, but there are some manipulative influences that are present and quite easily kind of pervading our social spaces that we aren't readily able to recognize. And I think focusing on digital literacy may help.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I know that the point about digital literacy resonates with us all, and it's a big issue. facing the country as we try to adapt. I want to ask Ryan to come back in at this point, because as someone who produces content and is really focused on not only what the audience wants, but also the process of generating content and telling stories, right? What does digital transformation mean for the filmmaker or the photographer who wants now to reach this increasingly digital audience?
Well, thank you for that. I think the separation of audience, user, content creator, producer has been blurred, and it has been blurring for quite some time now. So that separation comes as a result of the technologies that now exist. I mean, they're small enough, portable enough, and powerful enough that everyone can use it. I'm going to draw what is happening now in the US with all of the protests, and we're seeing all of this information, we're seeing it live and in living color, straight from the protesters. You know, it's not really the journalists who are out, I mean, journalists are out there, but we're seeing it from them, and we're seeing all of these images. But we still need the practitioners to help us put it into context, right? We're seeing images, but we don't understand it, which is why right now the top 10 bestsellers on Amazon is about race, because people want to understand, well, what is going on? Why is this happening? You know, what are they protesting about? Yeah. So we have that on one level. So the creation of content, the consumption of content, and the distribution of content has now been so democratized that anyone thinks that they can do it at any time, right? And our students live in this world where, you know what, I can create my own content and I can put it out there. But what makes it different? What makes it stand out, right? If everybody can do it, then, you know, why are they going to look at mine? Right? And so we live in this space of, okay, what is the stories that we're telling? We come back to stories because, you know, the stories are what take us beyond the limits of our own lives, right? So we understand other people's experience of life through the stories, you know. It helps us to think, or to think deeper. It conveys richness of emotion and insight into character. This is what stories do. So whether or not you're telling a nonfiction story or a fictional story, it's still expressing life, and expressing life fully, and helps us to understand the world that we live in, and possibly even the future that is to come. So I think we're in this space of a kind of convergence. And then you asked about what does it mean for a filmmaker. Film is technology, right? Film came about because of technology. Cameras were created, so therefore now we can tell these visual stories. First it was still, and then we developed motion, right? We went from analog to digital, and in that whole transition in how we view the films that we make, whether it's, you know, in a cinema, we got television came in, and then cinema went bigger and broader. And so we keep adapting, and every time we adapt, our stories change. Yeah, so it's not a thing where you know, it remains stagnant. It's always changing. It's always constant. And that's what I think what it means for audiences and users, is that we're all producing content. So
Nice.
now it's to understand the content that we're producing.
So Ryan, as you speak from the perspective of a filmmaker, I'm interested in, is that experience different for an animator? Chevenese, I know that operating remotely is something that many animators have done, although they're inspired by that external environment. How has the adaptability process impacted the animator?
Well, to be honest, the animation industry is thriving. Film right now, as you know, they would have to meet physically in order to execute their productions. And even though we've seen 1 and 2 productions where they have used the Zoom technology and the Cisco technology in order to execute that production, for the most part, the film industry has been stalled. While the animation industry, because we can work remotely, we create on the computers, you just need to have the proper equipment, and you also need to have the proper software, and of course, internet, in order to communicate with your colleagues. And we use servers as well, so that files can be shared and rendered how we see them on the television. But I also want to make note in regards to this digital literacy and transformation, is that it's a question that I get asked by my students all the time. You know, why is it that I will go to a university to study when I can simply access the information that I need on a YouTube or a Udemy or so on and so forth? And we're finding that young people now, because of the technology and the access that they have, that's what they go for. They can find the information at their fingertips. And really, the reason why you'd want to attend a university, the reason why you'd want to pursue a bachelor's in fine arts, in animation or film production, or a BA in digital media or journalism or IMC, it's that the trainers, the lecturers are going to guide you. They're going to assist you with how you compile that information. What will happen, and this happens sometimes, I'm not going to say for all persons, if they study on their own, they won't get all of what they need. But for most and for some, you need somebody to guide you, to tell you, how is it that you put this information together? And so at CARIMAC, we have trained professionals that work within the field that can help to get you where you need to go, so that you can also flourish within the field.
All right, thank you. I would want David to respond to this question, but I want your response to be subsumed in my next question, because I know that we have progressed. I sense the optimism. I see that we have been making strides to adapt and adjust, but I am certain that there are policy changes that need to be made to fully empower ourselves as citizens, as users, as audiences, trying to exist in this digital world. We spoke about the challenges with electricity, etc. I'm interested, David, in your perspective on the policy considerations for the changing digital media landscape.
Thanks for that, Dr. Obika. I think often we think of technology and digital as this magic bullet, you know, that if we sprinkle a little digital on top of our problems, they'll magically, be solved. But technology is not a paradise. It can, while digital transformation can bring opportunities and access to many, it can exacerbate existing social economic divides. So, you have the concept of the digital divide, where communities and parts of society that have historically and traditionally been underrepresented and have been denied a voice are even more so disenfranchised because of a lack of access to technology. And so when we're thinking about this digital transformation, we also have to think about the issue of inclusivity and the protection of our vulnerable. And so in that way, policy and laws and legislation, need to be adapted, not just to protect those who have already, been given the resources to access this new digital age, but also to provide it to those who are probably in more desperate need of it. And so there are a number of policies that I think are very much intrinsic to this transformation. The Data Protection Act, which is now a bill, which was passed last month here, is in line with a change that we see globally happening with GDPR in the EU. But the Freedom of Information Act or Access to Information Act, depending on the territory you're in, is equally as important. But there are territories, here within the Caribbean that still don't have access to information or freedom to information acts that allow citizens to be able to, one, access information that the government has, two, our own data protection, to be able to request from private entities what data they're storing, as personal data that they're storing, and to know when this data is influencing a business decision that affects an individual citizen personally. What we have to realize is switch to digital means that there's going to be a massive amount of data that is generated and stored about us, so that these organizations can better deliver services to us. So on one hand, you have the provision of convenience, and on the other hand, you have the dissolving of privacy. And this is all encapsulated by our existing socioeconomic divides that we have been battling for decades, or even before independence.
Thank you very much, David. I mean, you mentioned the Data Protection Act. I know that that was one of the necessary precursors for the NIDS, because I know that was one of the issues. How do we protect our data when we give the data up? And this act certainly goes a long way. And there's a lot more that needs to be done to continue to provide access to technology and to improve the digital infrastructure. Because I mean, Jamaica has a cell phone penetration rate of over 100%. One of you may have more updated stats than I do. But access to the technology doesn't always pertain to efficient use of it. And we're now encountering scenarios where data charges, I hope Flo and Digital are listening, but data charges are quite high. We have issues with electricity, etc., where policy does have a role to play, if for no other reason but to encourage dialogue, because that is absolutely essential in order for us to be able to exploit the opportunities that this digital landscape provides. And additionally, I want to make one more point as someone interested in policy, that we tend to operate in silos, borrowing a word from Steffon. We tend to operate in silos nationally within the region, when we have to remember that there's this thing called CARICOM that does have the potential. It does have the potential for helping to harmonize the approaches to legislation and to governance. It will give us stronger lobbying powers and allow us to be able to negotiate with some of the multinational corporations who control the technology, but also the digital infrastructure. All right. We're approaching the end, and I know that you viewers, you have lots of questions. I encourage you to continue to type them in the chat. We have the monitors who are sending the questions to us. I wanna, before asking David to respond, Chevenise, you wanted to make a point here?
I just also wanted to mention that when we speak about security, what we're finding is a lot of schools are simply choosing tools that best facilitates them and not necessarily the security of the students. And so one such incident, of course, we must speak about the Zoom incident, where hackers were coming into the classroom and, well, doing not so nice things in the classroom. It's also about sharing the information, the students' assignments, the students' works, the students' voices. What are we making available to the public that might not be conducive to what we really want to do. So at the University of the West Indies, we have a team that specializes in securing the information for our students so that it's not out into the world landscape. And so that is something, again, we have to consider when it comes on to teaching with these technologies. You know, are we being secure with the information that our students would like to share?
Definitely. And the Data Protection Act will certainly help to legislate that. And David, I ask you to make a point quickly before we move to the next.
I mean, you raised a very good point about NIDS, Dr. Obika. And I think this goes to a point Chevenise had made much earlier. In that while we are making a great deal of progress in digital transformation with the provision of services, there's underlying infrastructure, both technological infrastructure in terms of internet access and physical access of devices, but there's also needed legislation that helps to grease the wheels of progress as it relates to digital transformation. Having I guess more modern forms of digital transactions accessible to local small merchants, whether it is in the form, I mean, you have examples in the States of Apple Pay and Google Pay and so on, contactless payment that's secure and encrypted and so on. All of these modern conveniences that can help digital transformation have to be built on some rigid financial policy as well as identification and data protection policy. So we're slowly moving in that direction, and there's progress to be made regardless of how far we've come thus far.
Thank you very much, David. And the next question, not necessarily a question, but a deep reflection I want to pose to Steffon Campbell, in particular for our students, and I hope you're listening. Contemplate, for me, Steffon, the future of careers in media and communication. I mean, we've heard about the issues, we've heard about the challenges, but what does it mean for that person who has to function in the industry?
So Olivia and Ryan mentioned the fact that, the blurring of the lines between the audience and the producer. So the reality is we have people who are able to create content. We have content creators. Anybody who has access to the technology in the palm of their hand can create content, the TikTok, the Snapchat, whatever. The journalist of the future, for example, needs to be a context creator. He or she needs to be able to put the information in a context, a deeper level of analysis to make the individual understand what this means for them. So for example, the protests, we have videos sharing about all the protests and the incidences that led to the protests, right? But without any additional information about the differences in experiences of the individual of African descent in North America, for example, versus us in the Caribbean. That is the role of the journalist, to be the context creator. And that's at the School of Media and Communication. Those are the deeper level of analyses that we are expecting of our students. That's what we are teaching, right? Critical thinking. Additionally, they also need to be content curators, meaning they are understanding that this information and that this content is out there, but being able to put it on a platform in a way that helps individuals understand. Keeping in mind what Olivia and David said, understanding that people have varying abilities, understanding that people have varying literacies. That's the type of journalist that we want. And of course, being able to monetize this information, being able to monetize context, the story, the content, instead of just working in the newsroom and the media house paying you. You have to be able to understand how these things can be monetized. The different streams of incomes, right? The different pathways for earning from the stories. And yes, being able to tell the user, whether it's an audience member or a producer, that this is real, and this is fake, but also the context of reality is very much shaped by your own experiences, by your own Caribbean culture, your own national culture, your own global world, your own global or world view. That is the type of journalist, that is the type of marketer, that is the type of advertiser, animator, film producer that is going to distinguish or separate themselves from the individual who solely produces or puts out content in the future.
Thank you very much. Very powerful charge to the students. I hope you listened exactly to what he said, because it's no longer about regurgitating. It's about creating, it's refashioning, re-envisioning your own existence within the industry that you work. It's no longer about the hierarchical structures, but about being able to generate new knowledge based on the context that you observe. So, Rayanne, I don't know if you quickly wanted to respond to this, because it also has a implication for those who tell our stories.
Well, I love what Steffon just said. I mean, it was powerful and it's true. We have to be context creators. It's all about who is making the meaning. Meaning is very important for industry and for people understanding the world that they live in, right? Whether it's to change it, make it better, or just to understand what is happening right now. But I want to talk a little bit about the patterns and trends in storytelling, and how that has even changed. How games used to be this separating thing, and we're now interacting in games in very different ways with each other, playing online. I heard there were concerts and games. I mean, the way the future is going, it's very exciting, and it's something that we should jump into. How sports had to adapt to this time where we were socially distant, and how much we need these things, how much we need the sports, and everyone, I'm sure, has been streaming movies and television shows galore because of having to be separated at this time. So there is always going to be a need for story. It is just the format of the story may change a little bit, but the stories will exist, and it is up to us now to adapt, to create those solutions for people, in order for us to consume the stories that we need.
Very good points. Thank you. There's one more question that I wanted to ask, but I have 3 questions actually from the audience that I want very brief responses to, and then we'll have to proceed to the end. I want to ask anyone who may have questions. We definitely are committed to answering them. In the chat, in addition to your question and your name, please provide us with your email. We will be sure to respond in a timely manner. So, first question is to Chevenese. With student-centered learning, arguably student-centered teaching, the focus and online delivery, the modality, okay, I'll make sense of that for you. How do we encourage the hunger for learning? So with student-centered learning and the focus on the online delivery, how do you encourage that hunger?
Well, we always have conversations with the students about what they are interacting with and what the knowledge that they've gained. Personally, I don't like to be the sage on the stage. I want my students to give me as much information as possible, and we have a conversation around what they have found out there. So I actually encourage my students, go out, find information. I might give them some context. I might give them some guidelines as to what to find, but go out, find the information, and then share it. One thing that I do, we in the animation program, we set up a community for the students. So at UE, we have access to Office 365, and Yama is a service within Office 365. And so what we do is once those students, even if it's outside of the classroom, because you don't find information all the time within the classroom. So if you find information outside of the classroom, post it to Yammer. And so other students now can go, oh, that also exists, and they can have a conversation around this other thing. So if there's an artist that you found, post the artist's work, talk about the artist. Why do you like that artist? If there is a portfolio that you found, why is this portfolio so interesting and engaging? Why do you like it? That's the type of conversation that you want to encourage your students to have. So allow them to go and find information. You might even learn something too.
I love that answer where you almost flip the script. And in the process of transformation, the teacher can also become the learner, because it's very important.
Exactly.
So very good point, Chevenese. The second question, it's a big one, so I really want a brief response, maybe from two persons. How do we harness the enormous benefits of the digital transformations as developing societies without becoming consumed by a utopian vision of what they can achieve? Let me repeat, or do I need to repeat? Does anyone have a response? Let me go again. How do we harness the enormous benefits of the digital transformations as developing societies without becoming consumed by a utopian vision of what they can achieve? Go ahead, David.
Yeah, funny. This is I guess a topic that's quite dear to me. In that, I think I mentioned it in one of my responses before. I think if I were to sum it up, we can't lose sight of the people that are using that technology. We have to be very human-centered in our approach and how we design interventions that are technologically driven. And to rephrase that Google mission statement, to do no harm or do no evil with the use of these platforms. Technology is an amplifier. It is a vehicle. It is a tool. It enlarges and extends your reach and your impact, and you have to think hard about the people that are involved in that work, in that reach.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I want to thank Doyen for that first question and the second question by Dr. Henderson. The third question, how do we harness, given that we're in a period of major change right now, do you think that this is a time to address the systematic barriers in Jamaica that hinder the participation in the industry, specifically film and animation? So I will allow those who specialize in film and animation to respond to that, the systematic barriers. Go ahead, Ryan.
Wow, that is a big question. Traditionally, in film production, a lot of the work that comes in and that gets done, it's you can talk about from Trinidad, where I'm from, and here it's it has been a small group of practitioners, but of course the technology itself was not widely available to everyone, right? So you now have a situation where you can easily buy a prosumer camera for that is reasonably priced and gives you a quality product. And we have a number of filmmakers now who are creating content and putting that out there and marketing themselves as filmmakers, which is great. We're seeing a lot more content, and it has really opened up the industry. I think the Film Commission had put out that $1 billion or so was made last year in just from film productions alone. So, but you asked about that systematic, what was the word?
Systematic barriers to
Systematic barriers.
in both
Right.
film and animation. So I hope Chev has a quick response after.
Right. So because of that, because of this, people having the ability to work outside of that, this is a production house and we hire, these production people have been working outside of that it has, essentially created a path around it. And so that it is coming apart, right? And because of that coming apart, we're seeing all of these new exciting things happening, different kinds of films being made, different voices being heard. And I think that that is an exciting prospect.
All right, thank you very much, Ryan. Chevanese, I don't know if you wanted to contribute. I know that animators have been breaking down those barriers, but you can go ahead and shed some light on that.
Well, this is so interesting because with my colleagues, we have this debate all the time. So if you're working overseas and you're working in a studio, you have to have access to technology and software that is outside of the price of an individual, right? And so what we're finding is in Jamaica, we've been trying to find more cost-effective ways to be able to create that content for smaller teams, because that's where our industry is right now. We're not the US, we're not the UK, we're certainly not India, right? But what we can do is we can form small teams and we can create. And so what we've been doing is finding more cost-effective solutions. So stuff like Blender, stuff like Stop Motion Studio, Moho, all of those software. If you go to CARIMAC right now, well, we're not really accepting persons inside our space because of social distancing. But once you get the opportunity to go to CARIMAC, you'll see that all of our labs are decked out with Macs, right? And so not everyone can afford a Macintosh, that can, a really nicely spec'd Macintosh computer can cost you from $2,500 to $3,000 US. And that's just for the machine. We're not talking about the software or the servers or the drawing tablet. So yes, there is a sort of barrier, but honestly, if you put your mind to it, you can create anything. And as Ryan has been alluded to so many times, it really is the story that you're telling. The example that I often give my students is South Park. South Park started out with cut-out animation, as in paper, and they cut it out. All of those characters were made out of paper, and they took photos and voiced it, and they created an animation. Now South Park is big, and they have the budget, so now they're using software. Even though the style looks the same, they're not using the same technique. And so, yes, there is a barrier to getting into animation. It can be expensive to be an individual in animation. But honestly, if you really want to tell that story, if you really want to get that information out there, nothing can stop you. If you have a cell phone, you can do it. If you have Stop Motion Studio, you can do it. If you have paper and scissors, like the producers of South Park, you can do it.
Thank you very much, Chevanese. And I want to thank Mona Rise Art for that question. I want to thank all my colleagues. This has been a truly insightful and invigorating discussion. We've discussed a range of issues pertinent to preparing for media careers in the future and even beyond that. We've looked at teaching and learning, us as users and audience members. We've discussed policy, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more that we can discuss, which is why this is part of a 3-part series on the topic of adaptability. So I'm certain that the audience, especially many of our students who are with us this afternoon, have benefited immensely from your knowledge. So thank you very much. The thanks must also be extended to the Associate Dean for Marketing and Outreach for the Faculty of Humanities and Education, a dear friend of mine, Dr. Nicole Plummer. Thanks for your vision in making the Humanities in Action virtual seminar series possible. Thanks to the Director of CARIMAC, Dr. Livingston White, and Mr. David Soutar, who helped to conceptualize CARIMAC's contribution to this series. Al McLaren and his entire technical team at CARIMAC must also be thanked, in addition to Andre Forbes and Ishmael Preston, the hardworking members of the UWI Mona media team via which you are enjoying this event. A special thank you to you, the audience, for being attentive and engaging throughout the session. I must remind you, this is only part 1 of a 3-part series that will continue on June 18 and June 25th. Part 2 on June 18 will feature the following recent graduates. From Barbados, Kishmar Shepherd. From Jamaica, Jovan Johnson, Ronaldo Marchalek, and Danalyn Swaby. From St. Kitts and Nevis, Pamela Diaz and Cleon John, and from Suriname, Christina Taylor. You are most certainly invited to attend this wonderful and educational event that will be broadcast via UWI Mona Media. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next week.